Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure what he said, but listen, it's not exactly suffering for Jesus being here in Copenhagen. It's a fantastic city. We've been here a few times and love it. One of our favorite cities in the world. And we do love cities, Deborah and myself, and it's always a joy. We've been in Denmark and Norway for the last kind of 10 days or so. And I'm sure we'll be back again. Thanks for having us. You heard a little bit about my strange background. Kind of like I don't know where I'm from anymore. I'm the wandering Jew, nowhere to settle. I'll tell you, hopefully my story will weave into a little bit of what I will say today. But I realize I'm speaking English to people where it's second language. So I'm going to try slow down. And if my wife's not here, she would say I often mutter. I talk slowly and very shyly. I'm a shy guy, really. So she would remind me, but if not, if you think I'm not being clear, just go like that and I'll get the idea. Great worship. I loved the worship this morning. It was great to join with you as God's people as we worship together like that. And with this crazy woman next to me, I'm in love with her already. She's amazing. She was like rocking on. I'm going to take her home with me. I hope I won't mind. So it's a great joy. It's been mentioned I come from a Jewish background, and if you know anything about Jewish people, you get 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions. I think this one Jew has 3 opinions, okay? Behind that is like this idea in Jewish culture is that sometimes you take an idea, even if you don't agree with it necessarily, but you debate it out or you dialogue vigorously. And in this argumentation, in a healthy, robust conversation, we come to a deeper awareness of truth because between us the truth is found. It's not just simply in one opinion. And behind all that blather, I'm trying to say that I do enjoy the give and take of conversation. I prefer it, to be honest with you. I can drone on the whole day if you want, but I would appreciate if you every now and again throw your opinion in. Be very un-Danish and get unpolite with me. I don't mind. If you disagree, shout it out. As long as it's on topic. Let's not go off any 2 sides. We have shorter kind of sessions. Can I get a sense, guys, what time I finish this session?
You have 1 hour.
About 1 hour. Okay, good. With this in mind, so I'm inviting you to interact with me. I do think we come together in a very, very poignant, difficult time for the church in the West. I think I'm saying something you guys already know. You're living in one of the most secular countries in the world. I know that you're not all from Denmark, but I'm sure that Norway is the same, and I know it is the same. I come from Australia, very, very secular. Secular, by the way, we mean by that is not necessarily doesn't believe in God, but they reject the form of God found in the church. That is, the secular society was built on the separation of church and state. It's not that they reject God and spirituality, as I will show. It's they reject the forms in which we express that in. And that's going to be one of the big challenges we face. It's late in the game in Europe. We have had 2,000 years of the Christian message in this continent, and we find ourselves in serious decline. One of the images, one of the books I read not so long ago, a very useful book by a guy called Joshua Cooper Ramo, very cool name, Cooper Ramo, yo. That's just great. Okay, anyway, so Joshua Cooper Ramo wrote this book, The Age of the Unthinkable. And what he suggests in this book, one of the images he gives is an image of a sand pile. Now, there's no beaches. Is there beaches here? Yeah. Okay. Do you have sand on the beaches? Yeah. Okay, then good. Well, I'm sure you've been to a beach anyway. If you took the sand at the beach and you poured it, if I poured it out on this carpet here on this floor, what will happen is that it piles up, and then another bucket of sand, and it comes to a peak. And then it could be theoretically 1 grain of sand fall on the top and the whole thing resettles. And scientists are fascinated with this because it's it's about chaos theory and load and density and all. I don't know any of that stuff. But the imagery is very useful for us because he likens the age in which we are living into a sand pile. Now, I want you to feel this in your gut, not just your head. I mean, we're living in a world that just feels like it's getting... I'm just living in America at the moment. It's not pretty. It is not pretty. We can cover a little bit of that later if we come to that. But we're coming to a point where you feel like everything's going to resettle. And you just have to think of economics, politics, environment. Who knows where that goes? And everything's unsettled, and everything's connected to everything else. In this kind of condition, little Greece, with a GDP economy of a very small American state, if that went down, it would take the EU down with it, the EU would take the rest of us down, the whole world would go down economically. One little state, a small, relatively insignificant player, affects the whole world because everything's connected, right? Now feel that with me. Another example of this would be, we thought in the Arab Spring, we thought that was going to be really, democracy was going to come to the Middle East. Well, it's turned out to be a nightmare with now Islamist forces all over the place. It's very, very tricky times that we're living in. Cooper Ramos says that in those conditions, you cannot resolve the issues, that if you take ideas that were formulated in a different time and a different place, if you take ideas that come from there and try and apply them into the sandpile situation that we find ourselves in, you create more problems than you resolve. It creates more problems if you take ideas that formulated in a different time in this situation we're in. And that is the problem that we find ourselves in. I'll give you an example. I say I live in America at the moment, we, in the first Gulf War, the idea behind the neoconservative movement at the time in the Bush government was that we would take democracy formulated in America, American-style democracy, and we're going to export it to the Middle East, a place that has no tradition of democracy. In fact, quite the opposite. It has always been run by dictators of various sorts, royalty and all that. It doesn't have any tradition of that. Now, by the way, it doesn't even work in America anymore, if you noticed that. It is fundamentally broken there. Now, we're going to take that, and we're going to take that to the Middle East. And look where we are now. This is the law of unintended consequences, right? We end up in a far worse situation. I would argue Islamic State is a direct result of that. No one intended that, but that's what is the result. And Iraq is in a far worse situation now than it was under Saddam Hussein. Now, that's a good example of just trying to take paradigms, taking out of a different situation. Now, I won't go much more about that. I want to simply say that the church is notoriously bad at this. We take formulations, particularly, I say with due respect, the European church, formulations that were taken from different times in our history. In our case, is largely from the Reformation. We take 16th century formulations of ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church, or soteriology, or all that stuff has basically been stamped in the last. Well, some of us have traditions that go back to the 18th century or the 19th, whatever it is, but these are a completely different set of circumstances. So I want to just highlight this in a very useful video. It's not to do with the church, but it gives us a good look at how this could be applied, or the same type of thinking can be applied in educational systems. It gives us a chance to look at some other thing and draw some conclusions about ourselves. It's 10 or so minutes. I think it's worth it. Hopefully you'll appreciate this, and it'll kind of get the point across with some visuals as well, so you don't have to listen to my English. It is English, but it's going to be hopefully quite clear. So let's give it a shot, guys, and see if we can do that. This is Sir Ken Robinson, an Englishman, oddly enough also living in California. Again, if we had the time, I would love you to kind of interact with me on that. It's easy to look at the school system, which was designed in the 19th century, 18th century, in the image of industrialization and in the kind of the pattern that was set then and what it has had now. But I hope that the parable becomes clear to us that similarly we in churches just assume that patterns that were set in previous kind of centuries and certain ages necessarily have to be applied now. And that I want to say, I think we can be freed from that. Let's celebrate the fact that we are actually celebrating the 500th year of the Reformation this year. And one of the great gifts that the Reformation did give us, which it hasn't followed terribly well itself, was this I can't remember the full Latin, but it's called Semper Reformanda. Now, Semper Reformanda was a formula that went like this: that the church, once it is reformed, the church reformed ought always to be reforming according to the Word of God. We look at the church, we look at the Word, we look at the church, we look at the Word, and we realize, I think we have not yet arrived in the kingdom of God. There's always better ways to get this done. There's no reason that you should hang out necessarily with 4th century formulations or of ecclesiology, particularly the forms of the church. The way the church expresses itself is entirely up to different contexts and different cultural groups. Otherwise, we should have all been like the Jerusalem church. We would all have to have taken the original Jewish form, which, of course, Paul fights about with Peter, actually, in the book of Galatians particularly, but it was in the book of Acts, where we see this tussle going on about the Jewish church trying to foist the formulations of Jewish understandings of church onto the Gentile peoples. And the argument goes that no, the Gentile peoples have a right to worship God in ways that make sense to themselves. The church, the gospel is inherently transferable. And the church must always be something that takes context seriously. It should be different in different places. We don't all have to talk the original languages of the Bible. We're not in that sense like the Muslim people. We don't believe you have to read the Bible in this language. We believe you can translate it. And you must, to make sense to people. This is the logic of the incarnation. And we need to be inspired by the logic of the incarnation again in our day. Let me try and get this out here. Any comments, perhaps, if you... Anyone got a comment to make? This is one magnificent whiteboard. I love whiteboards. Everyone all right? Okay, so I'm going to interact with you from a few things that relate from Australia, but I think you'll find it relates to you as well. But in order to set it up, I want to introduce you a concept that was developed by a missiologist called Ralph Winter. Winter was working with training people to go cross-cultural, and he developed this thing called cultural distance. Oh, that's no good. Distance. Cultural distance is this idea of difficulty in communication of the gospel. You put this thing on like this, and it's every line indicates a significant barrier to the meaningful communication of the gospel. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of these numbers indicates a significant barrier to the meaningful communication of the gospel, okay? So if you're going cross-culturally to another country, what do you think would be a significant barrier?
Language.
Yeah. I mean, agree with me now, if you have to learn a language in order to communicate the gospel meaningfully, yeah, that's a little harder now, right? It takes a long time to kind of get into the language and into the logic of the language. So that now you've got to slow it down and pay attention a whole lot more. What would be another one? Big category. Not don't say culture because it's all culture. Poverty. Yes, economics. So you can say economics could be a way, and poverty is part of that whole thing, yes. Another one might be worldview or religion. Another one could be people's race or their story that forms them as a people. The Danish people are different again to the German people, or different again to the Norwegian. You have different stories that shape you as a nation. Now, any missionary, you have to pay pay attention to those kind of things, right? So over here, friends, you're probably in Saudi Arabia, doing it very difficult. The church has had hardly ever any impact there since we've been around. And we have been doing mission in that part of the world for a long, long time. Never really had any impact there. Even St. Francis went there, actually. Didn't do very well there either. And here's the problem. Because going back to our idea that I said before, the idea of the church that we have had, in certainly the European church, which we are now in, it was formulated in a time when the church was central to society. We call this Christendom, where the church basically was bonded to society and became the central religious institution. In fact, the only one allowed. The others were banned. Jews were allowed to exist, but with lots of persecution. Some gypsies who kind of got away with it. Mostly, though, everyone is Christian. And they're baptized into the faith. And actually, it's interesting in the land of, I love Søren Kierkegaard, right? He's one of my heroes. And his job, he says, was to introduce Christianity to Christendom. So much that everyone had become a Christian, no one was a Christian anymore, right? Love Kierkegaard. I'm going to visit his museum when I'm here. But the thing is over here is that most of the ways we do church were formulated in a time when this was assumed as to be part of the deal. But the problem is, folks, is that in Western settings, it's gone and moved in this direction on us. Everything's gone and shifted, not only in terms of the fact that every nation now is represented probably in this country, well, if not everything. I live in America where every nation on earth is represented, but that would be true increasingly all over the world. But also that we now find ourselves even within cultures, there's a breakdown of macro culture, and people now identify into different subcultures. A very obvious one would be an LGBT culture. It has its own little culture that people belong to. You can submerge into it, never emerge again into straight society. If you really wanted to, it's very well developed. And they've got communities, and they've got all kinds of counseling services, everything going for themselves. And so the fact is that it's very much more complicated now, and we find ourselves having to do our work in this kind of setting and that. And here's the problem with this is shrinking on us every year. And so the assumption is that most of our methodologies and most of our assumptions about the church is that we can operate within M0, N1. This is where we can do evangelism, by the way. Evangelism doesn't have to, or outreach you might call it, outreach doesn't have to reach out very far beyond M0, M1. And I would argue that most of our methodologies, even Alpha, is really an M0, M1 tool. It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't try communicate cross-culturally. Now let me give you an example of this, and I'm all for Alpha, right? There's nothing wrong with this, by the way. In a sense, you've got to reach to your primary groups, but the problem is it's not going to work over here. Well, you can't assume that it will work, and I'll give you some tools on how we might think about that. Let's say a person over here, Thomas, for instance, a guy called Thomas, he works over here with a person called Abdul. Now, Abdul is, by his name gives him away, is a Muslim man. He's a second generation. He's not, he's a Danish Muslim. He's not that religious, but it's definitely part of his culture. Now, Thomas happens to be a very good evangelist and brings Abdul to the Lord. What would be the natural next step, do you think, once he has become a Christian? When someone becomes a Christian, what do? Yes, but that assumes something. Come to church? Yeah? So the natural thing is come with me to church, right? Well, that's what you would do. I would do that, right? So the idea is that, okay, so we'll take Abdul to church here. Now, this is a very good church, and it does a lot to assimilate him into its life and its community. He's a single man. There's a lot of single women around. He's probably going to meet his life's partner here. And this is all good. They do a good job of it. He is nourished, he's very excited about his faith, and he's now been nurtured in the faith here. The problem is, in a missionary environment, this is what we call, in shaping things to come, the attractional church. In other words, we assume that people must come to us in order to hear the gospel, right? And again, that feels so right. That's what we've always done. Attractional is all right here, but attractional in a missionary environment extracts people. Now, I hope you get the thing in English there. I would now call it extractional church. You're extracting people from their context. And over here. So the problem is, it snaps the bonds of relationship that Abdul had with the people over here. Now we know that within 3 to 5 years of a person becoming a believer, they will no longer have any meaningful relationships with people outside the church. The problem is most evangelism travels along relational lines. The people come to the Lord basically through relationships. Abdul no longer has any relationships here. So while it's an addition to the church over here, it loses the connection that he would have as a person of peace into his own environment over there. And this is problematic in a missionary environment. Again, it's not, don't hear this is bad. It's simply saying things have changed on us and we can't assume that the same conditions apply. Again, much of our thinking was formulated in a time when it assumed this kind of priority in culture. With me? Everyone? So, any comments? You feel free to shout it out and let's see how we go. Is my language all right at the moment? Everyone in school? I'm trying to talk slowly and I get excited. Such a big whiteboard, I'm getting like exercise while I'm doing it. Aerobics. So, let me put that up there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, just to keep the idea up there. It's not very good, but there you go. I'm now going to introduce you to some research that was done in Australia. There was this very well-funded organization called the National Church Life Survey. They were given a lot of money. Number of buildings closed down, and they sold the buildings and gave the money to this organization. And it really, what it did, and this has been going now almost 25 years, every 5 years they would do a survey across the nation of what's going on in the life of the churches in relationship to context. It's like a census, right? It's a church census. They take a snapshot on a given Sunday every 5 years, do analysis, and they give us the picture. And then, because they've got 5 or 6 of these in a row, we get to see what's happening. It's not pretty, by the way. We're going down. I'll give you some stats soon. I think their best work, and that's useful for us in leading churches, but I think their best work was done when they had done their work and they didn't know what to do, and they had all the money and all the staff. And they decided to do research on what non-Christian people who identify not as Christians, thought about 4 categories, a few other things as well, but 4 categories. I was asked to join the team of this to help interpret this. The 4 categories were God, Jesus, spirituality, and the church. Sorry, that's meant to be church. Now, I'm going to get you interacting with me, what you think Danes or Norwegians or whoever else is in the room think about this. This is positive, okay? That's maybe, and that's negative, okay? So that's what we're all going to vote. When we asked Australians, and I understand Australia is again a very secular country, our story is not the same. It was quite a rejection of the church, and Christianity was seen as basically false. And there's a story behind that because the British Empire and they were convicts and all that stuff, right? So Christianity has never taken root terribly deeply in Australia, not formally anyway. We never had a revival. Don't believe Hillsong on that. And when we think about God here, we're not thinking about Trinitarian constructs, or we're not thinking about God is in His eternal oneness, indivisible in and of Himself, existing in 3 persons. Not that. We're just talking about higher power concept, he, she, or it, cosmic force, a generic notion of God, okay? So don't try and think clearly in Christian terms. What did most Australians, and let me ask you, what do you think most Danes think about God? Do they believe in God? Positives? Maybe? And negatives? Well, most of you voted positively, and you would be right. We were really quite surprised for Australia that most of these people claimed to believe in God. In fact, about 80% said they prayed regularly. Now, this was quite a shock. Now, again, it's not the maybe Christian versions of this, but gee, that was quite a shock. We didn't expect that. So it actually came up quite well. And I suggest to you that just this is true right across the Western world. Atheists are very, very small, very vocal, 2 to 5% of any population. They're not very big at all. And most people, if they say is agnostic, but even behind that is the assumption that there's some sort of God, but they don't know if they can know him. Okay, the Jesus. What did the population think of Jesus? Now, just to say, again, don't think of this as risen from the dead, savior of our sins, all that. Think of this as this person and the impact he has on the world. Positives. Maybe, and negatives. We were again very surprised in Australia that actually people thought he was pretty cool. Now, try this out. You could go to the non-Christian person that you know. If you ask them the question, who is the greatest person who ever lived? I'm going to lay a bet that Jesus is going to come up in the top 3. And I'd go a little further and say, I'm going to think he's going to come up number 1. Give me some other names of the greatest person who ever lived. Who looks to Jesus? Who looks to Jesus? Mandela, who looks to Jesus. I kid you not. Anyway, you can pick up any of those people, and by the way, they don't compare with Jesus, really. And I'm not just being like, those are wonderful people, but they really derive their inspiration. Again, no disrespect intended, but you're not going to put the name Muhammad in there, or the person next door is not going to do that. Why did I say that? Do you want to go on vacation with Muhammad? No. No, you don't, okay? Do you want to go on vacation with Jesus? It'd be pretty cool. It'd be challenging, but it'd be pretty awesome, right? Yeah, that's the test, okay. So actually, Jesus comes up pretty well. Spirituality, the search for meaning, purpose, belonging, that kind of thing. What do you think most Aussies, what do you think most Danes? Positives, maybes, and negatives. Interesting, yeah, you're right. I think most people think this is really quite important. And most of our bookshelves in the bookstores are actually got a lot of stuff that does with this, and a very big part of people's reading and exploration, all that. So that comes up really well. When it was asked Australians what did they think about the church, what do most Danes think about the church? Positives. No one? I mean, maybe? All negative. Dude, it's we the guys who drive that sucker. Yeah. Australia, again, our story is bad. The church was really complicit in a lot of the early stuff. So it came up really, really badly. But that wasn't so much a shock, but it was bad. And I would suggest that actually most people, again, in the Western world, feel this. Now, partly, I just think they don't really know the church that well. I think most Christians are really good people. I think they're wrong, but they disagree with me, okay? But yes, most culture in Western settings says this. No. Now, here's the thing. If you're in business, right, I'd say, okay, your basic product is pretty good. God, Jesus, spirituality. Most people walking down that street believe these things are important and are valuable and think they're worth exploring. But they don't dig this part of the equation. So if I say if you're in business, I'll come to you now. So if you're in business, you've got a darn good product, but your delivery system's stuffed, and if you don't get that delivery system sorted out, you're going to be out of business pretty soon. Where do you lever for change? Where's your strategic leverage for change here? The delivery system. That's what's got to change. And here we enter into the conversation of the missional church. The assumption that the church is the primary delivery system. And I would say God's only primary delivery system for the gospel. We are messengers. We received the message. We are recipients of a message that makes us messengers, and our responsibility is to communicate it meaningfully. The change must be delivered here. Yes, sir.